Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Saddleback webinar this week. My name is Liz Mangus, and I'm a literacy specialist with Saddleback Educational Publishing. If you are new here, we always start our webinars just a few minutes early to allow you to get comfortable and to make sure you know where your control bar is. Now, I know it's 2020, it's been a crazy year. Most of you are already familiar with Zoom, but we always go over it just in case, because you never know who's joining us who might be new to Zoom. So on your control bar, you have a chat icon and a Q&A icon. Please use the chat area to communicate with all of your fellow attendees today. One thing to be aware of with the chat area is that there is a little drop down there. You want to choose all panelists and attendees because this will allow everybody who is joining us to see what it is you have to say. If you just choose all panelists, then only a handful of people see your comment. And so to really help with the interaction and the communication today, please make sure that you choose all panelists and attendees. The chat area is also where we will be posting links to the handouts and the resources from today's session. So be on the lookout for those. Now, what is the Q&A area for? Well, it seems pretty obvious, but that is where your questions should go. When you put them in the Q&A area as opposed to the chat, that allows us to get to them a little bit more quickly. Now, don't worry, if you do put a question in the chat, we will see it there, but it may take us a little bit longer to respond. So that's the difference between those two areas. We look forward to having you interact and communicate and chat. And while you're waiting, if you want to go to the chat area, let us know where you're joining us from. We always love to see who's here, especially, right, Tina, right before Thanksgiving break, we want to see who's joining us today. Another thing we would love for you to do is if you are on Twitter, as many of you are, we would love it if you would follow us on Twitter. Go there right now while we are waiting. Let everybody know you're joining us for this great learning opportunity today. Tina Bean from Sidelets Education is joining us today. So you can go ahead and mention Tina and Sidelets. The Twitter handles are right there for you. Let everybody know that you're here because we want to spread the word about these webinars. We want more people joining us. So while we're waiting to start, let's bring in Tina and say hello. Hi there, friend. How are you today?
I'm great. You're so good at this.
Well, doing this on a weekly basis for 9 months tends to help smooth out the process. So, hi, Tammy Sanchez from Duncanville. Beam team, that's right. Beam for
Tammy,
life. I love
yeah,
it.
Tammy was there the day that I met Liz actually at that conference. That was the first time that I actually encountered anyone from Saddleback, and we spent the day right next to each other in booths. So it's quite in like a Hollywood romantic comedy, it was quite the meet cute, as they
Yes,
say.
that's right. And Anna Mattis. Hi, Anna. Gosh, it feels like I just miss being able to see everybody in person, but
Yeah.
we'll get that occasion. We'll get that opportunity soon again, I hope.
Yeah.
Hi, Pamela. Nice to see you. Hi, Jerry.
Yep.
So I think we
Graduated.
definitely want to give everybody credit for taking time to be here today. I know that it's you guys are more than ready for the Thanksgiving holiday. I'm sure.
Well, speaking of, I need to know about Jerry Jennings from Brownwood. I'm wondering if Jerry knows me because that's where I'm from, and that's a county with about 40,000 people in it. So if you like in the Dallas area where I am now, our population density is, I don't know, 2,300 people per square mile, and where I'm from, it's 40, and in the counties around us, it's 7. So there's no way there's somebody from Brownwood that I'm not genetically connected to. So I'm a little bit.
That's so cool that you have somebody from your home county.
Well, yeah,
Um,
thank goodness I'm not about to tell some stories because sometimes I do. So good thing I'm not
that's all
telling.
right. That's all right. Hi, Michelle. Nice to see you. Oh, Jerry says she's from Fort Worth. Okay.
Okay.
Very cool. Now, I'd like to know, for those of you who are joining us today, who are in the classroom or working on a campus, are you a social studies teacher? Are you an ESL teacher? Are you a reading teacher? What do you teach? Let us know. Okay, we've got some social studies teachers. Excellent. Perfect. Social studies and English and ESL. This is the target audience. Oh, Ethity, Wyoming is back. Hi, Pamela. ELL teacher who works with the history department. Okay, perfect. Well, you all came to the right webinar, that's for sure. We'll get started in about 1 more minute. Tina, where are you located for those of you who are, for the audience who don't know you?
Yeah, it's like where in the world is Carmen San Diego, which was always my dream gig. That's what I want to be when I grow up. I live in the Dallas Fort Worth area of Texas now. But I did grow up in Central Texas. So I've lived my whole life in this state, with the exception of a delightful semester spent in Central America. So
Okay,
yeah, you're not
very
too far
nice.
from me. You're just down the
I'm
road.
not. I'm just down the road, about 3 hours, just north of Austin. So it's funny how it always seems that this is not true. If I actually did the math and counted, I don't think we have more Texas people on our webinars than non-Texas people, but it just seems like we have a lot of Texas presenters on our webinar. So, but that's okay. The more, the merrier. All
Absolutely.
right. So I think we are ready to get started. We have about 59 brave souls joining us today, exhausted, I'm sure, from your first semester of teaching, but ready to learn. Let's go ahead and officially launch. So today we're talking about literacy through social studies. We know that content area teachers are reading teachers too, especially for our ESL students. And so we want to take some time today to talk about how you can use social studies content to amplify or boost literacy for all learners. And with us to help us do that, we have Tina Bean. A lot of you who are joining us today, I know you already know Tina, who is awesome. But if you don't know Tina, she's written this book, by the way. We'll talk about that in a minute. So Tina is currently an educational consultant with Seidlitz Education. And among her previous educational roles were those of teaching social studies in a bilingual classroom, bilingual program coordinator, and secondary ESL facilitator. And she is the author of Teaching Social Studies to ELLs. If you don't have this book, go get it. It's great. Super helpful and not a very long read. You can get through it and it's got great tips in it to help you out. Tina, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you. We appreciate everybody joining us on this week before Thanksgiving. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I am excited to get started. So, I don't want to discriminate against our Canadian friends that I saw that it's not, or I saw someone from Ecuador as well. I apologize if you're not getting to celebrate next week with vacation. And I'm sorry that we're rubbing it in your faces, but y'all, we need it like for real. So, I really appreciate everyone who is joining us today. Liz and I have talked a couple of times in preparation for this webinar, and every time that we've spoken, we've talked about just who this audience would be and how admirable they are for showing up for professional development on a Thursday afternoon. Even if it's not a break for you next week, I know that everyone is overwhelmed and exhausted. So, we wanted to make sure that this in particular would be a very low stress, low key webinar. We're not going to talk as long as some of the other webinars have gone. And we want to really have a robust conversation in the chat today. So, if you want to share some ideas, some strategies, commiserate and collaborate, we'd love to see y'all interacting in there as well. So, first of all, just thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be here and to get some strategies and hopefully have an opportunity to share with some like-minded colleagues. And just really appreciate y'all for being here. So, in our short time together today, we specifically want to talk about just some practices and resources that can be used to maximize students' understanding while we're also trying to grow as readers, because we don't want to work in isolation in either social studies or in literacy. So, when I was in the classroom, I integrated my social studies into my language arts block and found that to be the most successful approach. So, I want to talk about that with you today. We'll be communicating our understanding and our ideas for improving instruction today by using that chat or the question and answer feature. You know, in the classroom, when students are allowed to talk and sit near each other, there's this whole ecosystem that's happening in the classroom of student to student communication that the teacher is not a part of. There's a whole world that happens that the educator is not involved in. And I feel like in webinars, that's kind of what the chat can be as well. So that's your opportunity to share ideas, ask questions. And if there's something that needs to be addressed right away, if I'm saying something that's unclear or needs to be elaborated on, or that we want to elevate to this part of the interaction, Liz will kindly interrupt me and have me address those at that time. So otherwise, we'll keep questions for the end of the session too, and I'll address a couple of those before we end today. All right. Every session that I'm doing, whether it's a training for sidelets or this, anytime I get a chance to talk to other adults, I am putting Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I'm probably going to print this out and take it to the grocery store and show it to the clerk and be like, listen, I'm not going to tell you about my views on masks because everybody who comes through here does. But here's what you need to know. It's really hard to do your job. It's really hard to do our job right now. So if you are in the United States with me and you have vacation next week, I really want you to think about meeting your basic needs next week. So for our students, for us, for everybody on this planet, right now, we're facing some unprecedented challenges in terms of our lifetime. This has happened before in the world, but not while any of us were participating in it. So we're not used to having our safety needs and our physiological needs questioned and threatened in the way that they are right now. So for your students, for yourself, for anyone in your learning community, just be aware that without those basic needs being met, it's really, really impossible to learn. So I hope that this next week you can spend some time focusing on your belonging needs, your safety needs, and your own physiological needs, because I know that you have worked harder than you've ever worked before in the last couple of months, and I really hope that you can get some rest. But between everything that's going on, I know that may be challenging, and everything you have coming up in December and next semester. But just be aware that it's hard for everybody when we're not connected. It's really impossible to learn. So if our belonging needs aren't being met, and we're not able to connect with our friends, and we're not able to travel for Thanksgiving, all of that affects our ability to perform at school. And the same is true for our students. So just heaps and heaps of grace, and as much gravy as you want to eat by yourself, because no one's going to judge you because you're home alone, or just with your immediate family. Whatever you need to do to get through this next week, I just hope that you'll take some time for yourself. All right. So I'm a total, absolute obsessive proponent of the importance of social studies. And I find that there are three things that I like to say about why social studies is so incredibly important. One is that it connects us to our past. And this is a great entry point for our students in order to get them excited about content, because everybody has a story, and your story is informed by historical events around the world. And if you're currently a resident of the United States, there is a story of immigration in your background. So you are somehow affected by immigration. So we want to really connect to our past and the rest of the world. So that's what we're going to talk about today specifically. And I just want to go ahead and throw this in here too. This is my kid a few years ago, y'all. I'm going to brag about this until he is 45. But a couple of years ago, for the last Halloween that he was excited to dress up for, he wanted to be George Washington. I don't know why. I didn't plant that on purpose. Yes, I carry around a copy of the Constitution in my bag, but I did not at all do this to him. And I'm just so grateful that he feels connected to the past, and he still wears that tricorn hat around the house. So for a lot of our students, they don't as easily see themselves as George Washington. So it's really important that we help our students understand that where we are now is a result of our past. And that helps us explain what's going on a little bit within our present day. And also, these are our students are going to eventually influence the future, and they already do. But their future choices that they make as adults are predicated on their understanding of what has happened before. And so, if we want to raise up a generation of students who are more compassionate and more empathetic and more intelligent and more and more and more than we are now, then we've got to change the way that we're helping them to view the world, right? And we have to give them a picture of the past that keeps them from repeating our mistakes. So I think it's incredibly important that we help our students connect to this content area, and we infuse it into every other content area because there are implications in every single domain. So this is a lot of text, and the reason this slide has so much text on it is because I'm thinking of this as more as a resource for after our time together today, because we won't be in this collaborative environment for too long, and I want you to have some takeaways. So this is how I would use literacy and social studies together when I was doing a content lesson for literacy. But this can just as easily be a lesson in a social studies classroom that's promoting literacy, if that makes sense. So we start with a whole group, and we're going to do an example of this in just a second. So don't stress if it's a little overwhelming. So we start with a whole group idea and we have a whole group discussion. We kind of set some expectations and some basic norms and a basic shared understanding. Then we go into small group or partner work in whatever way that looks for you in your current learning situation. And after that, students have an independent expectation. But that independent piece only comes after we've had some type of collaborative piece and also some type of whole group experience. All right. So let me tell you kind of how I see that in the classroom happening now. The lesson I would want to teach were I to be so fortunate as to be in front of kids again, because once you're away from the classroom, you really romanticize it. We all do. It's almost, it's not unlike childbirth. Not that I'd want to go through that again, but you forget the pain and you just remember like the glorious moments when it all went right, right? So when I imagine these lessons, of course, I'm thinking of it from the lens of somebody who's no longer in the classroom, but this is exactly what I would do when I was with my students. So imagine this as the staircase. You want your students to get to this top level and be independent. So we're all going to start at the bottom together. And then after we've been at the bottom together for a little bit, we're going to move up to that small group and partner work stage. And then eventually they're going to do some independent reading about the topic. But we're going to start all together and develop a common understanding and then move into those small groups and partner activities and then the independent piece. So, what would that actually look like in the classroom? Let's talk about using actual physical realia. The primary source is the environmental print. There's so much we can pull from in our environment, and that makes it real and that makes it connected. And for students, if it's not connected, it's not going to get through. Everything is about them, especially those of us who specialize with adolescents. If it's not about them, it's not going to connect, right? Everything is about them. I like to say that everything that happened on this planet before they were born, they consider to be prologue so that we could lead up to their majestic existence, and we all just live now to serve to further their life. So we've got to connect this back to our students, and that's why I was talking about at the beginning. Everyone somewhere back down their line of family history in the United States has a history of immigration, which means somebody probably in their family came to Ellis Island, and that means that this Statue of Liberty was somehow connected to them in some way. So all of our students appreciate that connection, right? If it's not relevant, it's not going to get through. So this is one idea of how we should treat immigration. But then at the same time, we'll have political cartoons like this. And this is from, I believe, I can't remember if I pulled this one from the 20s or the 50s, but the attribution is at the end of our last slide. So you can check those sources if you want. So the first thing we do in our whole group and mini lesson would be to talk about these are two competing ideas about what America should be. You don't need to agree with either of these. You just need to understand the sentiment behind them. So our purpose of our whole group discussion would be, can we understand why this message is being sent and why this message is being sent? And I'm so passionate about talking about this because I've already alluded to it in the beginning before we started. I grew up in a very small, isolated, rural part of Texas, which is a fairly isolated state in and of itself. So you can drive 9 hours and not be out of the state. So that means that it's a land of its own. Like when I was in high school, I won second at state in something, and my relatives were so proud because my aunt said, "Well, second in Texas is like first in any other state." So growing up in this environment, my hometown county just voted in the presidential election 86% for one candidate. And that tells me we're not having a lot of conversation because 86% of people in my town cannot agree on barbecue. They can't agree on the church. So we need to have a conversation, right? There needs to be a conversation held of how can 86% of people believe one thing? We must not be having dialogue amongst our whole population. So when I talk about bringing up an issue like this, that can be pretty fraught. We want to keep our students focused on what is the message, not do you agree with the message or do you disagree with the message, but just what message is being sent here. Then we move into our small group or our partner work. And that's where we get to talk about a specific example and we use a resource, I don't know, maybe from the awesome people at Saddleback, because they have fantastic resources like their high-low readers where the content and the ideas and the graphics are designed for our students who are at upper middle school, high school level, but the readability is at a level that's accessible for beginning and intermediate and advanced English learners. So in our small group or our partner work, we would do some type of task that is connected to the levels, the literacy levels of our students so that meets them where they're at and helps them grow. And then we move into an independent piece. So The way I sneak in independent reading is by not doing it in book form. Kind of like the way if you have a toddler, you sneak veggies into their dinner, right? You like hide it in a lasagna or something. This is the same idea. So if you're not familiar with this resource, it's my favorite thing on the internet. Minnesota has done a fantastic job of collecting the stories of their immigrant citizens. And you can go to this website, which I have linked at the end of the session, and you can find all of these stories that people have recorded of their own experience as an immigrant. And I just picked one student or one person, and I showed you her picture, but actually what you would see is it's a video. They recorded video of themselves. And then there's a transcript of the video that's available so you can read along with them telling their story of immigration. And then also the related items is a link to a Google Doc. So if you take that, students can have that read out loud to them later. They can practice fluency with that. So there's a lot we can do with the literacy aspect of this besides just having them watch the video and read along. But when you're looking for ways to integrate reading into social studies, I recommend doing it in sneaky ways like this, where they don't even know that they're reading. And as much choice as possible is where we want to go. So from that page that I showed you, that's just this is just one tiny excerpt of the page. There's like so many different examples. And they've actually already curated this list. So the link that I have at the end is to a final page they have for teachers where they've grouped stories under different ideas. So you don't even have to go through and curate them and make sure they're stories that are appropriate for your age group or whatever. That's already done for you. So that link is at the end. All right. So let's zoom in now on just the small group part. So what we just looked at was whole group and then small group and then independent. So we're going to zoom in on the small group piece. And in that small group, what we'd want to do is in some way go over the text with the students before they read. We know that for English learners, especially, going over the content before with the vocabulary and the graphics sets a framework and parameters that are really helpful for the brain to make meaning of the rest of the story. So we want to make sure that we do spend a little time before we get into the words, really making sense and scaffolding that instruction. And then when we do the small group, we want to have mostly the teacher read out loud. So if you're not in a place where you can sit at a small table with your students right now and read, then we want to think about reading the story ahead of time and having the recording play for students through their own earbuds, or directing them to a website where, like, a lot of our favorite children's stories or a lot of resources now have been read by famous actors, and you can find those on YouTube so they can listen there. But we want to have them listen to the story some and also have some discussion and monitor comprehension before we release them to independent work. When they do it independently, now we want them to only have some periodic fluency and comprehension checks, but to be reading on their own. Does that make sense? All right, perfect. I'm going to assume that you said yes because my computer doesn't talk back to me. Okay, so I know I'm bringing a lot at you pretty quickly, but I want to make sure that I give you just a few strategies to take with you to look at after this next week. So just know it's like a gift from your past self from this week to your future self who might be lesson planning or helping others to lesson plan. Three really quick things that I try to do anytime that I want to infuse some literacy and do it in a sneaky way. My favorite vocabulary strategy is one of ours at Sidely. It's called describe, describe, draw, and it's exactly what it says. I describe the term as the educator. My students describe the term to partners or in some type of shared activity, and then they draw a visual representation. And then we choose the best visual representation to serve as our image as a class for that term. And once you automate this process, it becomes very natural. And the students tend to then put a lot of emphasis on the drawing piece, which is a great way to highlight some of your students who aren't the most verbal. Those of us who are more verbal tend to dominate in terms of vocabulary, but sometimes a student will draw something that you're like, oh my gosh, yes, that's such a great way to represent that. The kid who does that is not usually the kid like me who's yapping their head off every day. It's a sneak attack. It comes out of nowhere. And you're like, that's such a great way to see that. That's super validating for the student. It's really validating for you as an educator. And it's also really important for the kid who's used to doing all the yapping about vocabulary to see somebody else be able to represent it visually in a way that they couldn't explain. So I'm all about that. I love describe, describe, draw for any age. It's great for pre-K. It's great for adults. So that's one of my favorite vocabulary strategies. I describe it, you describe it, then we draw it. That's it. My next strategy I want to share with you is just speak using complete sentences and expect your students to do the same. We write the way we speak and we speak the way we think. And we are judged based on our speaking. As somebody who comes from a rural background, don't I know that? I'm so used to my family. Like when you hear them speak, you hear the banjos and you assume that they're not very intelligent or articulate, but they are. It just takes them a while to get it all said. But once they do, it's usually pretty intelligent. So I know that so many of our students feel judged based on how they speak. And it's really important that we give them the opportunity to learn how to express themselves in the academic register. So we want to always speak using complete sentences and expect our students to do that as well. That will have a huge impact on their writing. And then finally, opinionated annotation. If this exists, I don't know about it. I think I made it up. I like it because it's just about whether you like it or not. It's opinionated annotation. So the only purpose when students are taking notes in this format is to give their opinion. So they're reading and they're like, I agree with this because I disagree with this because you don't have to have any qualification. It's kind of like social media. You don't have to have any like actual source for your opinion. You just need to express it. So I have discovered over time that when it comes to annotation, it's not about the notes they take. It's about the fact that they're taking notes. It's about monitoring the comprehension. So if their note is about how they don't like it because it's dumb, because blah, 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 that doesn't matter to me because you comprehended it. You had to comprehend it enough to hate it. So I'm good with that. This ties into a couple of our standards. This is the social studies standard for middle school here in Texas. We want to identify different points of view about an issue or topic. And at the same time, we want to monitor our comprehension and do all these different things, including annotation. So combining those standards is a great way to accomplish more in a little less time. And you'll notice across the content areas, we're all so focused on helping students appreciate different points of view. And just because I understand it doesn't mean I have to agree with it. So I think that's a really important point to make. We want our students to identify different points of view. And then we want them to be able to understand different points of view, but that doesn't mean we have to accept or agree with those points of view. We just want to make sure that we understand and identify them. All right. And there's something else we want to do that really helps. I can't remember what it is. Oh, yeah. Sentence stems, sentence stems, sentence stems, sentence stems, sentence stems. If I could leave you with anything, it would be sentence stems. They level the linguistic playing field. They make sure all of your students respond using a complete sentence. They bring in academic language into exchanges that otherwise probably wouldn't trend toward the academic register. Sentence stems are your very best friend, but they need to be planned in advance. If we just try to do them on the fly, then that doesn't really work. It's got to be done in advance. And we want to make sure we bring in our academic language when we plan those. Now, I don't hold kids to sentence stems 100% of the time. If you have a great way you want to express this, go on with your bad self. But I do require that they use complete sentences. And if there's academic register and academic language in the stem, the academic language should be present in your response. All right. Okay. So just a couple more resources I want to share, and then I'm going to turn it over for Q&A, and then anything else y'all want to talk about. I got some recipes. I can show you pictures of my cat, whatever we want to do. As I start to talk about these, what are some literacy resources you're starting to think of that I'm not gonna mention? Put those in the chat for those of your friends here who took time out of their busy day to come to this webinar. Share the love with them. Share that Google document we're working on. They'll share theirs back. I'm just imagining this whole sharing circle happening, and it brings me joy. I'm linking you guys in the references page to a webinar that I did right when the pandemic started, where I collected a whole bunch of different resources, and I'm going to keep updating that. I need to add some more stuff to it, but it's got some stuff in there already. So I've got a Padlet for you with some more content and ideas, including that Maslow's pyramid that I want you to print off and staple to your forehead. And then I also want to make sure you know about Common Lit, because if you're not using this already for social studies, it's going to change your life. You could have just come for this part. The previous 21 minutes were unnecessary because this is everything. So commonlit.org, free for teachers. You can set it up and link it to your Google Classroom. You can assign the readings through Google Classroom and have them graded if that's your jam. But I just want to point out they have a whole section called text sets that's 100% like history. I mean, it's just, there's so much social studies content in here. When you assign readings to students, if you haven't used Common Lit before or it's been a while, I just want to point out some features, and I'm not paid by them or anybody for anything, but, and this is obviously free because no teacher should be paying for any content ever, period. But I just want to shill for them because they have some great resources. Now, one is that the text can be read out loud. It can be translated into, I think there's like, I don't know, 40 languages, 50 languages now that they can translate into, and it does it paragraph by paragraph for the students. There's annotation, there are guiding questions, discussion questions, and assessment questions. So highly recommend checking out Common Lit as a resource for more literacy for your English learners, for all of your students. And you can have kids reading on different levels, and they can just all be centered around the same discussion questions. So that's one of my very favorite resources, and I highly, highly, highly recommend that. All right, so hopefully while I've been talking, I see the chat's a little more active. So that's great. I mean, it's been active. You guys are doing wonderful. I just mean more activity has happened while I've been talking. All right. So I know I drove that thing like I stole it, but in 20 minutes, we examined several practices and resources that we can use to maximize students' understanding of the past while simultaneously helping them grow as readers. And we also hopefully communicated some understanding by writing in the chat and using the question and answer feature. So I just want to make sure you see all of these resources in this slide. Of course, you'll receive this whenever you get your final recording or whatever the magic happens that Saddleback delivers it to my inbox every time. If you want to do more training with me possibly or connect on the interwebs, here's where you can find me. I've also co-wrote our teaching science resource with Dr. Stephen Fleener, who's one of my other favorite people besides Dr. Izquierdo and Anna Mattis from Sidelets that y'all saw in the chat today. You can email me if you have any questions, want any resources, would love to talk about training with any of y'all, and I'll see you on Twitter. So Liz, do you have any questions for me so far?
Yes, I do. I personally have questions in
Oh, no.
addition to some questions that our audience has submitted. So first, let's go here to the question area so I make sure that I actually get to the audience questions and not just my own. I don't want to prioritize my own. So Melissa wanted to know, is the translation done by Google Translate, and worried about its accuracy? Is
I don't,
the
for the Common Lit, I don't think so because it's already like preloaded in there. So like when you click on it, like when you click on that paragraph, it just drops down and it's already there. So my understanding is they're not then translating with Google Translate. But that's a really good question.
Yeah. And then when we're pre-teaching the academic vocabulary, what's the trick with keeping newcomers engaged there? Any tips on that?
Yeah, so when it comes to pre-teaching vocabulary and newcomers, I mean, at that point, you're really only trying to teach key vocabulary to newcomers. So what you're having for your small group, that should be a newcomer small group if they're in that section and they're pre-teaching vocabulary. So what vocabulary you're choosing to pre-teach may be different than in some of your other groups. If you're trying to pre-teach the same vocabulary to newcomer, intermediate, advanced high, nearly fluent students, then you probably are going to have newcomers kind of checking out during that vocab section because often those terms are not the most high need terms that they have. So visuals are a great way to pre-teach vocabulary for everybody and they keep us more engaged. But I would say a specialized list for newcomers and a special time to go over that content with them specifically is the best way to reach them with that pre-teach strategy.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Mark has a question from the counselor perspective on this. So you can probably see this. I don't know if you have the question area open on your end or not. I'm
I
not
like
trying to. I'm not trying to offend you by reading to you. I just don't know if you have the Q&A window open on your end. So he's a school counselor and he wants to connect the social studies. He has to connect to the social studies standards often, he says. So do you have any thoughts on making those connections between social studies, literacy, and guidance standards? I personally don't know anything about guidance standards, so I don't have any answers to that. But
Yeah, I don't know anything about the guidance standards either. I'm really grateful for Mark and what he does because it's so incredibly important. But I would say anytime that you've got an opportunity in your ELA standards or social studies standards, there are quite a few that talk about understanding opposing points of view, like I pointed out in the social studies lesson piece, but also about understanding just where people come from. So there's a lot of literacy that's around cultural literacy and appreciation for other cultures. So I think that there's a real connection between that and building empathy in the classroom, which we're all trying to raise up a generation of kids with fewer jerks in it than we've produced previously. So I'm sure that would be in line with it, but that's my best guess. And again, Mark, thank you so much. You're doing really important work.
thank you. And then you did mention the Padlet. Is the Padlet link on the slides
It
for
is.
the
Yeah. So
participants?
the
That's what I
Padlet
thought.
link is right here, the bit.ly link that takes you to the Padlet.
Yes, and Cheryl, you have copies of the slide handouts that are linked in the chat where you'll be able to see that link. So thank you to the Saddleback team behind the scenes for dropping that link again. And hello, Regina James. Nice to see you. Now, there are some more questions. Can you go back to your slide with the staircase for a minute?
Do you want it fully developed or do you want it just, sorry, I got to take away all my sentence stems.
Oh, sorry. See, I'm just causing all kinds of trouble over
No,
here with
no
my
problem. I don't
requests.
know that I really said sentence stems enough, so a good chance to do it again.
So I'm guessing you want us to do some sentence stems,
Yeah,
Tina.
just a little bit,
Um,
a little bit.
so I just want to make the connection. Maybe I missed it, but if I missed it, maybe other people missed it too. I would like to strengthen the connection between a couple of different points of your presentation here. So you talked a lot about whole group, having a whole group mini lesson, and then moving to small group and independent reading. And then a little bit later, you talked about describe, draw, opinionated, annotation, and some of those strategies, which are great strategies to use really at any point in time. But can you make explicit, like when in this cycle here that you have on this slide, when you might insert some of those activities? Like I'm thinking if I'm doing whole group mini lesson and kind of introducing some vocabulary, then I might do describe, draw there in whole group. Now, what about some of these other strategies? Where in this particular framework would you plug those in?
Oh, it's such a good question. Okay. So absolutely I would do describe, draw as a whole group. And then I would choose to do the opinionated annotation in small groups together. And that would be a great comprehension check. So that strategy would work as your kind of comprehension in your small group. And then, of course, I want to have students speak using complete sentences anytime they're interacting, and then also write using those complete sentences about their independent reading. But we don't want to attach too much writing to the reading because I'm usually trying to get students to buy in at the upper grade levels who aren't eager readers, and adding writing onto the reading is not usually a very enticing offer for them. So we want to try to keep the writing piece and the annotating piece maybe more in the small group and the partner work, and independent reading really being more of a time for them to enjoy reading.
Perfect. And then when it comes to sentence stems, there was somebody who was asking if you could share some examples of some stems or talk about where you might find like a good collection of stems.
Yeah, the first thing I would do is give my students a list, which there are a ton of them online. If you just Google like social studies sentence stems, there are a ton of options where teachers have created anchor charts of just basic stems that they use. And it's not limited to social studies, but stems that they use, like I agree with so-and-so because, I disagree with blank because, I concur, and all these different language structures we want them to use to express agreement, dissent, and to really show that they're discussing and understanding each other. So I would curate a basic set of like 5 to 7 of those, and then also just have the common expectation that with every lesson, if I'm asking an essential question, it's also going to have a STEM attached to it.
Perfect. And I just wanted to mention that I just pasted into the chat area a link to language line sentence frames. And I don't know what that is, but it was posted. Nikki went ahead and posted it to us, but she didn't post it to everybody. So I wanted to go ahead and post that to everybody because Nikki, I think you meant for everybody to get that because it gives examples of sentence frames. So thank you for that. All credit goes to Nikki on that. That wasn't mine, but that might be a good place to look. Now, another question I had was earlier you had talked about adolescent learners, like the things have to be about them for them to really be engaged with it. And then you said something about the whole group mini lesson here, that the point in this example would be to just understand the two different messages. And at this stage, we're not asking for their opinions. So the first thing I thought of was, well, if I don't get to give my opinion at this stage, and it's not about me and what I think of it, how do I stay engaged in this particular process? Or is it by fact that this is pretty compelling content as it is, that we can guess they're going to be engaged because it is still related to their story in some way, or what? Am I thinking about this too
Yeah,
much?
no, you're absolutely right. So they are going to struggle to not express their opinion here, but that's the lesson we're trying to teach, right? Is that it's not just about what you think; it's about understanding multiple perspectives, and you don't have to agree with it to understand it. And we all have to learn how to hear something we don't agree with and not have an emotional reaction that affects other people's experience. So cognitive dissonance is something that we can generally avoid now by curating our news sources and our friend lists and making sure we only talk to people who already agree with us. And so students are less able to engage in this kind of discourse than we used to be in the past, because we used to only have so many sources of information, and you were guaranteed at some point that even if you loved Walter Cronkite and everything he had to say, there was going to be a night where he was going to say something and you were going to think, I don't know that I believe that. And we don't have to do that anymore. So I think it's right to wonder if students are going to be able to engage in this without giving their opinion. But the cognitive dissonance alone is enough that, in terms of the mental process, their brain is engaged, even if it's engaged because it's irritated, which is fine because teenagers are usually irritated anyway. So we might as well like utilize that for our benefit.
I love that. And I think too, you could also um, you might be able to entice them with opinionated annotating as well. Like, I know you have an opinion about this, but right now we're not going to express that. We're
Right.
just going to hear the message. And later on, when you get into your own resource or your own partner work, you can start, you know,
Yeah.
communicating that.
I definitely wouldn't let them have an opinion about this issue. I'm not interested in their opinion. Like out loud, you're allowed to have internally, yes, absolutely. But in terms of expressing our opinions about it, I don't even know that I would ever let them unless it was an independent reading reflection that only I was going to read.
Mhm.
But I just know that there's some kids who maybe have opinions now that they may not have forever, and they wouldn't necessarily benefit from sharing those with the group. So if it's a fraud issue like this, and it with teenagers, I would definitely keep the opinion part out of it, or to the very end where they can express it just in their response to me. But the whole idea is you're going to go through this exercise. You're going to see other people's perspectives and experiences, and your opinion is wonderful. I'm glad you have it, but it's yours to keep until the very end.
I love that. All right. Well, that just about wraps it up in terms of my questions. I'm looking here through the chat. Let's make sure we've hit everybody's questions. And the link for Common Lit is in the handouts.
Yes. Mhm.
And then somebody had also asked if you were going to repeat this training at any point in time because they wanted their team. Let me see.
Oh, I forgot to talk about
Tamika.
sessions. I'm so bad at this. I'm going forward to it. I forgot to even talk about, yeah, upcoming sessions. So,
Yes. So Tamika had asked if you will be doing this webinar again. We do, of course, provide the recording so you can access it again. But Tamika, Tina does this is what she does, and so if you were to need something further, she definitely has other sessions coming up. Did you want to talk about that?
yeah, so I love to talk social studies. As you can tell, it's my passion, and literacy as well. It's super super important to me. But we at Sidelets, we do training on all kinds of different language acquisition practices and different areas. So on the website, you can see all of our trainings, and I personally do almost all of them. And then I have colleagues like Dr. Izquierdo, who's here, and Anna Mattis, who also do a fantastic job of presenting. So you can go to Sidelets and see that. Currently I have an in-person conference for the spring still scheduled, but I'm available via the interwebs pretty much anytime. So that's an option as well. So just email me or reach out on Twitter, and I can definitely communicate what we have.
Um, we did have another question come in. Are there some types of set of mini readers for English learners on world history that you're aware of? Saddleback does have some great high-low social studies related materials, Anna, that we can help you with. But did you know
No,
of anything else,
no,
Tina?
even if it wasn't you and I talking right now, I would just say the Saddleback high-low readers would be the only thing. I mean, my colleague Natalia was tweeting today. I think you probably saw it, that she used the Saddleback high-lows to do Julius Caesar with her English or ESOL to newcomers. So that's the first and only place that I would go for that. And I'm not just saying that because Liz is awesome.
Well, thank you. But yes, we do have some high-low readers on some social studies related world history material. Well, U.S. history we have for sure. But Anna, we can help you with that if you want to email contact at sdlback.com and we can show you what we have. And we'll put that email in the chat for you as well. All right. Well, thank you so much, Tina. I want to go ahead and steal screen control back from you because I want to let everybody know what is coming up next week, not next week, but the week after, we're going to continue with our fall webinar series, and we have Dr. Barbara Kennedy, otherwise known as Dr. BK, and she is going to do a science lesson in German for us. And we're going to try something a little bit different here with our webinars. And if we have some volunteers who want to participate in her lesson on the 2nd of December, you'll have an opportunity to unmute yourself and participate in the lesson. So bringing language and content to life in your classroom with Dr. Kennedy on December 2nd. You can register on our website, sdlback.com, or you should be receiving an email prompting you to register as well. We've already taken our questions for the day. This is where you can find Saddleback. Contact at sdlback.com for those of you who have questions about materials. We're also, of course, on all of your favorite social media platforms. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, of course, Pinterest, Instagram. We are there. Check out our YouTube channel. That's where you can find all of our previous webinar recordings. And we hope for those of you who are joining us from the United States that you have a great break next week. Well deserved. Take care of yourselves. And we will see you on December 2nd with Dr. Kennedy. Thanks, everybody. You have a great day.